Hi everyone and welcome back to another video. First of all, if you haven't watched my last video, I strongly recommend you do go and watch that before you watch this video because that will explain everything that's going on in this video. So in the Regency era, as I talked about in my last video, the first layer that was worn, the layer that was worn next to the skin, is called a chemise or a shift. So since I am trying to sew a full outfit from the Regency era, I naturally started making this first. So this video is kind of a mixture of what I did right and what I did wrong, so I hope that you watch it all the way through and learn something from it, and if you're sewing yourself, that's great. If not, then I just hope it's relaxing to watch. And let's get right into it. So the first thing I did in sewing the chemise was draw it out. I always do that just to give me a visual of what I want and all the different pieces I'm going to incorporate from pictures I've seen and all kinds of things. And then what I do is I come up with some sort of pattern. I usually end up changing this, but I like to have a jumping off point, especially for something so simple like this. And here's a pattern with all the alterations and how to sew the side seams if you want to screenshot it and use it yourself. Here I'm just measuring out my stays that I made because I wanted to match the neckline. I'm still making them. And then I also just kind of held the fabric up to me to see how long I wanted it and how I wanted it to fall on me. Then I just drew out the big rectangles I needed by marking these little points, and then I used a method of ripping the cotton. I just found this out, that cotton actually rips really nicely along one single thread. The only thing is you have to iron down the ends after because they kind of get a little frayed and jagged, but after that it's wonderful, easy to handle, and it saves a lot of time. So the next thing I did was measure out the neckline, how deep I wanted it and how wide I wanted it, and for this I used a method called drawing a thread. So with this, you just take a little thread, one thread out of the fabric wherever you want to cut along, and this gives you a really nice even line in perfect grain with the fabric, so it's perfectly straight. And you do have to be very careful cutting along these lines, but it really pays off because it's so easy to work with these edges. I just lined them up to see how it was going to work, and it seemed like it was, so I got to pinning the side seams. At first I did these with a just normal polyester thread in the sewing machine. I will change that later, but we'll get to that. Then I tried it on to make sure that I liked the way it was going to fit, and then I thought it was time to sew the straps, so I started pinning them. But I pinned these wrong. I pinned them overlapping 3 inches instead of 6. But with the straps, I sewed along the sides, and just to kind of hold them in place, and then I actually backstitched down on each side of the straps because because these seams are going to be seen, and I wanted this to look as historically accurate as I could. So yeah, painstakingly hand sewed most of this project. So last night I had a fantastic realization that I did not line up the sleeves correctly. So I have to unpick my beautiful tiny back stitches and realign them and then resew them. So that was a very sad mishap, and it was very painful to rip out all of my hand sewing, but it had to be done. So after that, I remeasured everything, re-sewed down the edges with the sewing machine, and re-backstitched everything into place. So this is a shot of me back stitching. If you are wondering about any kind of hand stitches or anything, I actually learned most of my hand stitching from a video, and I'll link that video below so that if you have any questions about what I'm referring to, you can go ahead and watch that. I just don't think I demonstrate things very well, so okay, so the next step in this process was to fold under the extra seam allowance and fell it down. Um, Felling is also called whip stitching for reference. If you were making one of these, I don't know why you'd have to backstitch it then fell it. On historical examples, it's just usually felled when it's overlapped, but I guess I was being an overachiever here, I don't know. All in all though, I think it turned out pretty good and I really liked the way that the straps looked. Okay, so the next part of this process was to fold down the neckline, making the ruffle and the drawstring casing all in one. So I just measured out everything and then I clipped along these corner edges so that it would fold down properly. But I realized that something was kind of amiss, so I had to cut out extra fabric, and Sewing Me explains it in just a second.
Basically, there's a slit cut here, and I realized that this was going to be open, so I wasn't going to be able to put a full drawstring casing in with just this. So I had to sew. I have the back one sewn ready. I had to sew this in so that when this is folded down, there's a full corner there. And then this is the back side. This is the front side, and then I think I'm just going to whip stitch this corner to give it a clean look at the end. But I had to add that piece of fabric just to make sure I can get the casing going all the way around. Anyway. An easier way to do this, I have no historical reference for doing it this way, I'm just deciding to, but the historically accurate way to do it would be not to cut these and just to fell down a little edge right here and then add a drawstring casing. That's a separate piece of fabric here, but you know, I like to experiment with things sometimes, so I'm doing it my own way.
Okay, so now that past me has explained to you what's going on, I'm just gonna explain. You're just gonna see me back stitching in these little weird triangles. I think I created more work for myself than was needed on this project.
Okay, so I want to show the finished product. So basically, here's just one of them on the corner. I hand backstitched these in because I thought this would be really frustrating with the sewing machine, and it was frustrating enough to hand stitch it. So yeah, I was glad I did. I didn't do this for historical accuracy. I did this for not, you know, banging my head against a wall. Okay, so I didn't really film this because I wasn't sure how I was going to do this, and I tried it a different way every time. The best way I found was to stitch each side first, and then at the very end come on the other side and stitch the corner in, and then when I flip this over, I'm going to whip stitch that at the very corner so that it looks really neat. But right now I'm just going to go iron these down, and then I'll show you the next step. Okay, so this is one of the corners ironed down, and I thought that I'm going to do the whip stitch as I iron them because I feel like they're going to get a little bit messier if I move this around, so I'm going to whip stitch this right away and then go through all of these corners. Okay, so this is just the front of the chemise. I have it all marked and pinned. This is where this stitch is going to be. It's all going to be done with a back stitch. Since everything's seen on this, I want to be historically accurate. I've got a lot of back stitching ahead of me, but you know, we like that.
So editing me is going, yes, I do like back stitching and it's relaxing, but that was a heck of a lot of it.
Okay, so it's been a really long time since I've done an update where I'm actually talking to the camera. I've done what feels like a lot, but it's actually not. So as I said, all of the seams that you can see, or the stitches that you can see on the outside, are going to be hand stitched because I want it to look historically accurate. So I've been back stitching the entire neckline of the shift, and the way I did this was I folded it down and then back stitched it all around, and then I'm going to tuck it under and fell it, and that's where the drawstring is going to go, in between the little felled seams. Okay, so I've never done a full-on demonstration of how this is done, I don't think, so I'm just going to explain this really quick. Basically, this neckline is folded over. It was cut down like this on the sides, and I had to add this extra triangle as I showed. So this is folded down and then sewn. This is folded down 1 inch on this side, and then it's sewn a 1/2 inch away right there with the back stitch along that line. I pinned it on both sides. It keeps it a lot straighter. So yeah, this is just gone over with a back stitch, and then as you can see right there, it's just fell down. It's folded under and fell down, and then this is where the drawstring is going to be threaded through at the end. So before I finished felling everything down, it was time to make the eyelet holes. So I just marked it out right in the center, and I poked little holes with a plastic embroidery needle. And then I stitched it with some kind of silk thread that someone gave me. I'm not sure if it's synthetic or real, but I just stitched around it with the same thread I've been using for the whole project. So after that, it was time I could fully finish the felling, and felling is, I would say, more enjoyable than backstitching just because it goes a lot faster, and I felt like I was almost done by the time I was felling. I wasn't, but I felt like I was. So after all the felling was finished, I threaded through the ribbon for the drawstring. I had this light blue ribbon that I got a while ago, and I thought it would actually look really pretty with the kind of off-white cotton that this was. So I threaded it through, and it actually was a lot harder than I thought, especially going around the corners. So it took me like just a lot longer than I expected it to. Okay, so I have the drawstring in now. I finished it late last night. I'm not going to pull it tight because then I have to loosen it again, and that's a whole process, but it's in there, and I've tried it on with this pull tight, but that would be spoiler for the end of the video. So I've decided, after trying it on, I'm going to do the sleeves a different way than I originally planned. So on one of the Extant garments I looked at on the Met website, the sleeves were just like one continuous piece with the, what would you call this, with the body of it. So it was just like basically sewn inwards, and then there was a gusset added here. So what I'm going to do, since there's a lot of room in this, I'm going to take maybe 2 to 3 inches out of the side and then sew it down to 1.5 inches at the bottom so it's on kind of a flare. Then I'm going to cut the seam allowance down, cut right here, and then add a gusset square in right there so it's close to the arm. So I just pinned it to see how big I want it. I think I'm going to make it a little bigger than this, but obviously you don't want it to bunch up under the dress too much. So that is where I'm at, but I'm very happy with how this is turning out. It's actually like looking like a real chemise. Okay, so I realized it wasn't super clear what I was talking about. In my original plan, I thought I was going to sew an extra sleeve on and then sew the gusset onto the sleeve and the bodice. So as you can see in this example, and this is how most chemises were put together, there's another sleeve added on. So this is my original plan, and then I modified it because I didn't want to do extra work of adding another sleeve on when I could just use what I had already there. Okay, I was going to take a time lapse of this, but I think I need to explain it. So I've decided, since there's so much space up at the top right here, I'm going to re-sew this seam. One, because I want to do it in this like silk thread that I did this on, and second, because I'm going to sew it like at an angle coming in so that there's less space at the top and there's more room down at the legs. So I'm planning to just draw a line right here and sew along that and then cut the seam allowance down and to fill that. And then I'm not going to attach additional sleeves, at least I don't think so. I think since there's so much extra right here and I want it to be really short sleeved, I'm just going to cut this down and add a little gusset square right there. So that's the current plan. Yeah, I'm having a little trouble deciding on some things, but I'll update you when I decide. Well, I just talked to the camera and it wasn't recording. So basically I just tried this on. I put pins where I'm planning for my seams to be. It seems to fit really well. I like that it's not so bunchy in the top, but it leaves enough leg room in the bottom. So basically this starts at 1/2 inch seam allowance and then it increases by 1/2 inch every 7 inches until the 5th pin, and then at the 6th pin, after that it's going to stay at 2.5 inches away from the edge. I did that on both sides, so there's a total of 5 inches out of the top area and none out of the bottom, which is cool. So I think now I'm just going to have to unpick my first seams and realign this fabric better because I actually failed at this the first time, and then sew it with the new seams. My shift is now just sewn at the top, so I'm now going to line these up.
So after I realigned the side seams and pinned them into place, I sewed them with the sewing machine, but this time I sewed them with the same silk thread that I used on the rest of the project. Next it was time to cut out the gusset squares. I used the same method of drawing a thread so that I would have nice neat lines to cut on. Next came the absolutely agonizing process of trying to figure out where and how to cut into the side of this so that I could insert the gussets, because I couldn't figure out where to cut, but finally I just did it, and luckily everything turned out fine, but I was honestly terrified doing this because I had already spent so much time on this. So after the agonizing process of cutting into the side of my chemise, it was time to sew in the gussets. I got confused on this, so I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can. Um, but basically, the corner of the gusset square goes right at the top of the side seam in the shift. So to sew these in, I drew lines that I needed to line up on the shift and the gusset square, and then I pinned these into place as even as humanly possible, making sure that the pins went through both lines. I also pinned around the line so that when I had to take out the pins to sew, I could keep the gusset into place while still having a bit of leeway in maneuvering it. And to actually sew these, I just back stitched them, making sure that each stitch went through the line on the gusset square and the line on the chemise. This proved to be quite a frustrating process because each stitch took so much time to line up properly. Now with that side done, I did the immediate next side on the other side of the corner lined up with the side seam on the shift. After that was done, it was time to sew the top, and I had to snip a little bit into the chemise to get it to line up properly. but that's what it looked like when it was done. Then I had to sew up this extra little sleeve length, so I just did that. And then ironed everything down to make sure the seams were really set in place and everything was smooth so that I could finish off the seams by felling. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly talk about this next part of sewing my chemise. So, I had no idea how I was going to, in what order I was going to finish all the seams of the side, because with the little underarm gussets, I've never done anything like that before, so I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to fit everything together. So I just decided to do one side completely and figure it all out, and then film the second side and kind of explain the best way I found to do it. So I did one side completely, and I found it was a lot more convenient to fell down the side seam first and then fell down the gusset over the side seam and then finally fell down the sleeve or the edge of the sleeve around the arm. So I'm just going to show how I did all of that, and I'm really excited because I'm so close to being done and I cannot wait to have this done. Okay, so this is inside out right now. As you can see, this side is still unfinished. It's just how I sewed it. Okay, so I wanted to show this side because this is the side I have done. So I fell down the side seam towards the back. So this is the front. I felled it down towards the back, all the way up here. At first, I started to fell this down and I realized that I was going to need to do this first, so I had to take a break from felling this and sew the side seam. So I just sewed the side seam, and then after that, I fell down all around here. And then I also fell down the little seams this way. These I pressed open because I found it easier. Then I just quickly fell down. This took almost no time at all. This is what took the longest because this is practically whip stitched because it just, I don't know, I just feel like this is going to take a lot of wear, so I needed to whip stitch that. And this is just felled around the hem. I was thinking about adding a ruffle like this, and I might still do that, but for now I just wanted it to be simple, and I just kind of want to get it done. So that's basically how it's gonna happen. First the side seam, then this, then the sleeve, and now you'll get to see a lot of shots of me, a lot of time lapses of me doing this again. So before cutting down the side seams, I have to press it to the back to make sure the seams lay flat and nicely. And while I was doing this, my sister decided to visit. Yeah?
Do you make up scenarios in your head before you go to sleep?
All the time.
Really?
Yeah.
What kind of scenarios do you make up?
I don't know, it just like depends on what's going on in my life right then.
Me too.
Like, why'd you think of that?
Because I saw a video about it, and then I was like, oh, so it's
Yeah.
not just me. And then I was like, I wonder if Izzy makes a scenario.
Oh yeah, all the time. I like make up all these stories, like all the different ways like things could happen, and like yeah. If I'm mad, I just I just sprayed myself and I got shocked by it because I thought it was a spider. Like I'll like, especially if I'm mad at somebody, I like make up a scenario about like all the different things I yell at them about all the time.
Oh my gosh, look at this second.
Did you just do that recently?
I do it every night.
You too, bro. Anyway, I hope you got a laugh out of that conversation, and if you do that, comment below. You can be the first person to ever comment on my videos. So the next step in this process is marking out where I'm going to cut down the side seams, which is first a 1/2 inch, and then the side seam that's going to be tucked under is cut down to a 1/4 inch. Happy Christmas, Ron. Happy Christmas, Harry.
Bill Nye,
The science guy. I also snipped a little bit at the top because on the first side I found that I needed a little bit of space here to make sure everything laid nicely when I was felling everything down. After everything was cut to the appropriate length, I just folded the raw seam under and pinned everything into place. Then it was time to do lots and lots of careful felling. When I felled down the side seams, I made sure to only catch 1 or 2 threads maximum because I just don't like it when it shows through a lot to the other side. Then of course I pressed these seams flat so that they'll just lay even nicer.
Alright, so this is the gusset and I'm just doing the ones towards the outside of the sleeve first, the sides. So I basically marked a 1/2 inch away from this seam, sewing it in, and then I'm just going to cut along there through both sides. So there's this bottom part and the top part, so I just lined them up and cut a 1/2 inch in both pieces of fabric, and then I fell it down like the other side. And then there will be a point over here where I'll have to just fell this down separately because this is part of the sleeve seam and not the gusset. So that was a little hard to explain, but I hope that you can see when I actually do it.
So as I said, I just cut down the extra seam allowance from the gusset and the part of the chemise that it's sewn into, and then I fold it under the same way that I did the side seams and pin that into place. Then I do extremely tiny felling stitches to do the gusset.
Okay, so now that most of the gusset is stitched down, I have to stop and fell down the edges of this sleeve seam right here and then continue to go around this corner.
With the sleeve seam, I use the same really small felling stitches as I did on the gusset, just because I wanted everything to match, and I feel like the sleeve seam will take the same amount of wear.
Okay, so I finished felling down or wet stitching down the 2 sides of this. So now I have this little corner that's still free. So I just need to sew that down. And then all I have to do is hem the sleeve and then I'm done.
So this is probably getting really repetitive, but I did the same exact thing on the sleeve. I just rolled the raw seam under and pinned it into place and then felled it down, only catching 1 or maximum 2 threads so that it doesn't show through. Last, I had to do the hem on the bottom, and I did pretty long felling stitches because I cut this on the selvage edge, so it's not actually holding any raw seams down and protecting them, it's just holding it up to make sure it looks clean and finished. This didn't take me very long, it took me maybe an hour. And I didn't show it, but after I was done with this, I just pressed it down, and then my chemise was done. Alright, so I hope that video was helpful or entertaining, or both. If you liked it, please subscribe or like the video. Leave me a comment if you have any questions, and stay tuned because my next video is going to be the next layer of a Regency outfit, which is a petticoat, so that'll be coming very soon.